On page 140, that beautiful statement there, said by St. Thomas, it's the reply to objection 1, and it's the last sentence. Yet the slenderest knowledge that may be obtained of the highest things is more desirable than the most certain knowledge obtained of the lower things. As is said in De Animalibus. De Animalibus means concerning animals, written by Aristotle. In other words, you'd rather have the thing that is most desirable. What we love most is more desirable. And the slightest glimpse of that is worth all the other knowledges and glimpses of the lot put together. The slenderest knowledge that may be obtained of the highest things is more desirable than the most certain knowledge obtained of the lowest things, as is said in De Animalibus. We had a lecturer in chemistry. I can't remember what aspect of chemistry he dealt with. We had a number of chemists, a number of lecturers at the University of Sydney in chemistry that we had to study under. I can remember one. He was a proud man. The pride just burst out of his skin. He walked in a very affected way, carrying books in a very affected style, which I have seen in certain people in university levels. You don't see good scholars like that. I passed Father Regis, who's world-renowned, is a great master. I passed him in the street one day and he just walked past me with his eyes down, not looking at anybody or anything, just humbly walking along the street. But this man, I had to sit in front of him at an interview I had at the University of New South Wales. This man, as he got older, descended into a giggling child. That's how he struck me, a giggling child. He had great knowledge of chemistry and great knowledge of some scientific work. But really, there was nothing to him. I felt sorry for the man. But at that meeting, I've never forgotten it. He's like a giggling child. So, these people overcome by lower sciences have no knowledge of higher sciences. Like the night I went to the Centre of Inquiry in Buffalo, which I didn't realise what I was going into at the time. Somehow I got a blank mind about that. The Centre of Secular Humanism, the Centre of Atheism in America, and I listened to a debate. Well, I saw proud, arrogant men in the break they gave, all wearing these little things showing they were parts of the, belong to the centre there. I still laugh every time I think about it. When I sneezed softly and somebody said, "Bless you." An atheist saying, "Bless you"? I passed Paul Kurtz, who's America's #1 atheist, and he gave me a glance. We went through just a little passageway and we passed. I looked at him and he gave me just a look up and look at. I think he knew who I was, but he didn't want to, because he'd been challenged to debate me on one occasion. Then I was challenged to debate him. And anyway, neither of us were right for it at the time. I wasn't. The first time he was too busy. The second time I was sick, I think, of something I've forgotten now. Anyway, but the pride in men who have knowledge of the lower things, like those people who can tell you all the kings of England, all the presidents of the United States, or something like that, or who won the football games, say, at such and such a place for the last 50 years or something. Knowledge, the mind is not the better for having, it's called. In other words, it does nothing for you. And here he's just saying the opposite. This principle, namely, the smallest glimpse of something, say, important, is far greater than all the knowledge you can have about other things. So the little old lady who goes to church, who loves God and doesn't know anything about proofs, knows nothing about these sciences, but just has a pure love, that's far greater than the kind of love that you and that I could have. You may have it, but I may not be as good as that dear old lady. She might not be able to argue about things, but she has the knowledge of the ultimate end, which is a noble knowledge. So that is a very interesting principle. The slenderest knowledge that may be obtained of the highest things is more desirable than the most certain knowledge obtained by the lowest things. It came from Aristotle. So it is certain. The only incertitude comes from the weakness of our intellects. Look at as I have read, there are 50,000 or more critical evaluations of the Bible written. Yet these ignorant fishermen have written stuff that you and I could never hope to equal in any writings. And the fact that some people only have faith, not knowledge of these ultimate things, that doesn't take away the certitude. They couldn't defend the certitude perhaps, but the certitude is there. Others can defend the certitude, as we did our studies in apologetics, where you learn to defend the matters of faith. Then the next thing is, let's read the objection to objection 2. Further, it is the part of a lower science to draw upon a higher, as music draws upon arithmetic. But sacred doctrine does draw upon the philosophical sciences, for Jerome observes in his Epistle to Manius that the ancient doctors so enrich their books with the doctrines and thoughts of the philosophers that thou knowest not what more to admire in them, their profane erudition or their scriptural learning. Therefore sacred doctrine is inferior to other sciences. Now remember, this is just an objection that's been raised, and he's going to reply to that. Now let me explain the word erudition. It's a very unusual word. Like lots of Latin words, erudus. A means out of or away from. Away from crudeness. Rudus in Latin means crude. Away from crudeness. So a very erudite person can, in a very cultured manner no doubt, teach us a lot about what Plato and Aristotle said and what Kant said. But what is opposed to that? That in a way is a vice, if that's all you've got. What's opposed to that is understanding. There are people who are erudite, can quote everybody, but have no understanding. And that's the way universities teaches philosophy today in many places. You learn the history of philosophy, as Dr. Bonnet referred to earlier tonight. You learn the history of philosophy, but you have no understanding. You can say Kant did this, or so-and-so did that. Like that young Jewish woman in Ottawa said to me, Diane was the name, that's right. Diane said, they become a specialist today in one philosopher. Then they become a specialist in one of his books. Then in one of his chapters. Then in one of his paragraphs. Finally, a specialist in one word. And they call that learning. But understanding, following systematically through, that's not done very much in many universities today. Look at that business of, like mentioned about my colleague at Niagara University, and it wasn't Dr. Bonnet, by the way, of course you know that. Anyway, he dealt with abortion, capital punishment, euthanasia. That was his ethics course. What about all the principles about rights and obligations and all the whole thing and double effect and various principles? What about all of that? None of that. In fact, he said to me one day in a corridor, he said, I think a woman has a right to have an abortion to save her life. I said, what? I said, that's doing an evil act in order to produce a good end. That's breaking the first supreme principle of ethics. What about you and capital punishment, he said. He's dealing with that matter from the material viewpoint. They're materially alike. Abortion, capital punishment, they're materially alike, physically alike. But morally, they're utterly diverse. Oh, I didn't send you yet the abortion and capital punishment, a comparative study. Did I?
Maybe not recently, but I think maybe it did.
I will send you the unpublished version. The published version was butchered by a pseudo-editor. a person that's been placed there rather irresponsibly to head the Social Justice Review as one of the what do we call again, the referral editors, advisory board of editors. I strongly, and others did too, object to this man being appointed. He's completely unqualified. As far as we know, he has no degree in anything. And he's the head of that, doesn't understand the subject, and he butchers things. Dr. Bonnet published an article that he made 175 changes. And there's an editor that says, good Lord. And the only way he caught up with this is I tipped him off what had been done to my article. Dr. Watts down in Texas is furious with what they did to his article. Well, I'll send you the unpublished version, the proper one. Send that through to you all. I'll try and do that tomorrow. So, but today they talk about curiosity. Curiositas in Latin. Curiosity is regarded as a vice. They want to teach kids to be curious. That's regarded as a vice. Studiosity is a virtue. A vast difference. One, you understand and try to find the causes, the principles, prop and follow the science through. Curiosity, anybody can say that. Oh, what's that you've got there? That's curiosity. It goes nowhere. Doesn't develop the mind for anything.
That's the internet.
The internet, yes, you're right. Yes, quite right. That's a good example. So, my friends, sacred doctrine is more noble than all the other sciences because of its supreme end, the end of ends. It's the end towards which everything is going. Beatitude, happiness, eternal happiness. If we miss that, as I said on one occasion, quoting Father Woodbury, we might be better off if we'd been born dogs. And a student said, oh, I don't think so. It shows you how much he understood. Now, this science can draw upon the philosophical sciences, not as though it stood in need of them, but only in order to make its teaching clearer, for it accepts its principles not from the other sciences, but immediately from God, by revelation. Therefore, it does not draw upon the other sciences as upon its superiors, like, for instance, music draws upon arithmetic as its superiors, but uses them as its inferiors and handmaidens. Even so, the master sciences make use of subordinate sciences, as political science makes use of military science. That it thus uses them is not due to its own defect or insufficiency, but to the defect of our intellect. The difficulty is in us, not in the science, which is more easily led by what is known through natural reason, our intellects that is, from which proceed the other sciences, to that which is above reason, such as the teachings of this science. We always argue from the known to the unknown. We always go from the concrete and material to the abstract, my friends. And so our intellects sometimes very often, I should say, get out of its depth. So that sacred science, if you say to somebody, there are three persons in one God, I don't understand that. How can three be one? How could that go? Very difficult. It is, as it were, three views of God. But when you get into the article in Summa Contra Gentiles, Book 4, Chapter 11, you find there he explains in great detail how the necessity of the second person and the fact that God has a concept of himself that engenders or develops the second person of the Trinity. Then the love of that is the Blessed Spirit, the Holy Spirit. But we need to have concrete examples. But that doesn't mean to say that sacred theology is referring to these other examples and sciences as if it's referring to superiors, but it's referring to them as inferiors, merely to make it known, better known to the human intellect. And of course, one of the effects of original sin is we have darkening of the intellect. So that needs an enlightenment. Well then, I shall wet my tonsils. Good. They say, veritas in vino, truth in wine. So it's our deficiency that causes the need for those explanations, the same as we're doing here. Now the 6th article, whether this doctrine is a wisdom. Before we deal with that, a couple of little things I want to mention. I'm planning to finish this tonight if we can, and next week start on analogy. We'll probably be doing a bit of this next week too, on analogy, and that'll be the grand finale of our course. Analogy is a beautiful study, because then we're comparing all the radius of beings we've been studying about, but we see what the likeness is between, say, a stone, a tree, a dog and man. That's easy enough. But what about the relation between God and us? What's similarity? Tremendously different. That needs explanation. And we'll deal with all of that next week, all being well. I've been holding it back for certain reasons. Tweety Bird here has been helping me to get this on the computer for me. It's a little bit difficult to get a decent text. And I've written some of my own stuff out, and then I want to have a nice text to St. Thomas to sort of wind it up. I think next week will probably be our last. Isn't that right? Our last class? I think we planned that more or less.
For the summer.
For the summer.
Oh, it was summer.
Yeah. For the month of August, anyway. And make sure I've got your name and address. I've got everything on a card and on your email. Make sure I've got that. And somehow we'll let you know, particularly if you've got a telephone number. Let us have that. And an email address. They're the two ways we'll have to communicate. I don't think I'll have time to write letters. September I have to go to Washington DC to present a paper, so I'll be sort of missing just for one weekend. I'm not even sure which one it is now. I've forgotten. Can you remember which one it was, Jenna? Doesn't matter.
Is this the fourth, or
No, I think it was earlier than that. Anyway, we'll work it out. Now, for next year,
earlier than that?
we were talking about this earlier, and I think what we can do, we'll have first a bit of an introduction to philosophy, and that won't hurt you, just a class or two on an introduction to philosophy. Then we'll get right into rational psychology, philosophical psychology, also known as the philosophy of human nature, the philosophy of man, and philosophical psychology, also called philosophical anthropology. But it's the rational science that underlies all those other sciences dealing with man. Political science, experimental psychology, etc. This science underlies them all and is more certain than all of them and more useful, in spite of what some psychologists say. I attended a woman faculty member, since I was teaching in the College of Nursing as well as other places in the University of Ottawa. I was invited to her, and she and her husband invited me to their place for dinner, and I went along there. And a girl there, a strange young woman, said to me, "What do you do?" I said, "Teach," something just like that. She said, "What do you teach?" I said, "Philosophical psychology." Now this woman was a child psychologist apparently. So she turned to her and said, "What's that?" "There's no such thing." I said, "Well, I spent all my time teaching no such thing." She didn't even know it existed, let alone... So then, we'll deal the nature of non-living things, the natures of plants, the natures of brute animals, and the instinctive behavior and all that sort of thing, and human psychology. A most fascinating course. According to Woodbury, it's the most useful course for the ordinary person that's not a specialist in philosophy. It's the most useful and most interesting too in many ways. But it gives you a thirst for the other parts. That's what we all found. But anyway, we'll deal with that. But the thing that hurts me most, or not it hurts me most, I shouldn't put it quite that way, not for my sake but for your sake. If people are irregular in their attendance, it's very hard to get the continuity of the course. So I recommend that you do your best to be here every night if possible. I did that for about 20 years as a student, 2 nights a week. The only time I missed a night is when there was a terrible accident or something that stopped. Used to have trams then, and in those days, my early days. Later I acquired a car. Standing on your feet all day in a pharmacy and then going to lectures at night wasn't easy. But it was not easy when I was called upon at 5 o'clock to step into the shoes of a great, great master, a genius like Woodbury. Secretary knew he was ill all day, didn't tell me until 5 o'clock, and I had to go through city traffic and lecture at 6. Brothers, nuns, Protestant ministers, priests, you name it, laity, 100 or something sitting in front of you, and you hadn't even had time to look at what he'd been teaching. I knew what I was going to teach for my class, but not his class. You just want to run your eyes over it a little bit. And on an empty stomach, by the way. So now we come to this 6th article, whether this doctrine is a wisdom. As a preliminary, I want to put this on the board. There are 6 intellectual virtues. They're the speculative ones. Now they're called virtues because the word virtue comes from vis, meaning power or strength, from which they get vir, meaning man, from which they get virtus, meaning power, the power that man has. So a virtue is a power or a strength, which added to our intellect and will can give us certain strength. The speculative ones are, first of all, wisdom, or only in this writing order, then science, and then understanding. Understanding, also called intelligence. So intelligence is something added to the intellect. Then there are the practical virtues. Synderesis, that is to say, the habit of practical principles. Then there's prudence, and then there's art. Each of these give a quality of, or perfect the power in some ways. These 6 intellectual virtues all perfect the intellect. Wisdom, first of all, understanding. Basic principles. The whole is greater than its part. All that sort of thing. There, we call that power understanding or intelligence. It's added to the intellect and perfects it. And little children, straight away, as soon as they grasp the idea of something existing, being, all those beings out there, straight away know that nothing can be and not be at the same time. The whole is greater than its part, etc. Science, we apply the principles to arrive at conclusions. Wisdom is knowledge of ultimate things, ultimate principles. Ultimate principles, that's wisdom. Now, understanding is the basis of all our knowledge there. In the speculative order, the order of knowing for the sake of knowing. Synderesis is practical principles, knowledge of practical principles. I mean, simple little things like you can't have any organisation unless there's subordination. Unless somebody's in charge, you won't have organisation. That sort of thing. Practical principles. Prudence is applying them here and now. That's what the prudent person does. So prudence is ordered towards, say, the application in behaviour, here and now. Art is, knowledge is about things to be done. Things to be made. Prudence is about things to be done. Art is about things to be made. We call this prudence knowledge of practicables, and the other one is knowledge of makeables. So now we have also 4 moral virtues, just to refresh your minds. First, there's our knowledge about, or our virtue, which gives us a perfection in practice with regard to pleasant things. We call that temperance. It's our control in the case of pleasant things like sex and eating and drinking. Fortitude is about difficult things, difficult situations. So its object goes as far as death. Those moralists say that temperance goes as far as sexibles, and fortitude goes as far as warlike things, death. Then there's another one, but this one is justice. Temperance and fortitude concern me for me and you for you. But justice concerns me for another. Justice is my attitude towards others. Giving due, or giving to another what is due to him. D-U-E, what belongs to him. But this is all very well. Oh yes, I'm very temperate. But what about here and now? Here's this glass of whiskey. It's the 7th glass. So I might say I'm very temperate, but how am I going to be temperate here and now? So we require another virtue to help us apply temperance, or fortitude. What am I going to do here now? Here I am, I've got a company of soldiers, say about 130 men, and here I am facing a battalion attacking us. What am I going to do? Am I going to be stupid and rush straight in and attack them, or pull back a bit and get some reinforcements or something? That's fortitude. Justice, I found this pen here. What am I going to do? Advertise in the Buffalo News and the Gazette for about a 50-cent pen or something? Advertise all over, or Sydney Morning Herald in Australia? What am I going to do with this pen? How do I act just towards another?
You can advertise it for $8.95 for a week.
Can you? Oh, that sounds a good idea. So the three of them require another virtue called prudence. So prudence is an intellectual virtue and a practical virtue. Prudence puts reason into it. Prudence is a reasonable virtue. And it puts reason into these three here. So temperate, how am I going to be temperate? Am I going to sit there gazing at this box of chocolates and looking at them and saying, oh, I wish I wasn't a diabetic, or something like that? We do that? So, and fortitude about, oh, I got to get a shower, but I don't feel like it or something, etc., etc., but I've got to have one. Phew! I need it badly. So all that things, prudence dictates what we should do here and now. These may be just generic virtues, but here and now. These are practical virtues. These are called moral virtues. They're also called cardinal virtues. Cardo, C-A-R-D-O, in Latin means a hinge. Basic hinge virtues. So prudence joins the rational order and the practical order. The practical order and the moral order, or the moral order, if you like. So there's what it is now. It is my own judgment, as I've often said, and I publish this too, by the way, that education aims at prudence and wisdom. Prudence in the practical order, wisdom in the speculative order. When I look back on what I was taught at school, high school, junior school, I spoke to one of my teachers some years ago. Hadn't seen or heard of him for many years. I discovered later in life that he was only about 19 when he was teaching us. When we were sort of 14 or 15. And I thank God for those men, those brothers that taught us, the De La Salle brothers. They gave us wisdom. They gave us practical knowledge. I told one brother when I'd been teaching at a French university for 7 years, and I said, remember, you started me on the French language. You gave me the love of it. Because we had to do all our teaching in French. So, my friends, the question now is, what is a wisdom? Knowledge of ultimate causes. Knowledge of ultimate causes, that's what a wisdom is. Certain knowledge of ultimate causes. So what's a wisdom? Metaphysics is a wisdom. Is sacred theology also a wisdom? So let's see now. It seems that this doctrine is not a wisdom. For no doctrine which borrows its principles is worthy of the name of wisdom, seeing that the wise man directs and is not directed. But this doctrine borrows its principles, therefore it is not a wisdom. That's the objection, it seems. Incidentally, I had a friend who died a couple of years back. Tony had a lot of that, but very little of that. I seen him standing in a street corner. What'll I do next? I don't know what to do next. Will I go and see a movie, or will I go home and will I buy some food here, or go? And I had to say to him, what I'm going to do is this. The only way I could make him make his mind up, because he wanted to be with me, and he was a lonely fellow. But he had no prudence. As Dr. Pierce observed once, he knew him well. He said he had trouble understanding prudence. This fellow did. And he said, he used to say, what's prudence? And he couldn't quite grasp what it was. And Dr. Pierce said, that's because he's got none, that's why. He doesn't know what it is. But when we were students together at Montreal, it was so funny. We were students together, and listen to this. He came to the table, the dinner table at night. He'd say, look, now about prudence, he'd say. There was an English-speaking girl in the house, and Anne said, what's the matter with Tony? Is he having trouble with his girlfriend? And I said, he hasn't got a girlfriend. She said, well, who's Prudence? I never ever told him she said that. I think he'd have died of embarrassment. So it seems it borrows its principles from God, so therefore it's not a wisdom. Because a wisdom is the knowledge of ultimate things. Further, it is a part of wisdom to prove the principles of other sciences. Hence it is called the chief of sciences, as is clear in ethics. But this doctrine does not prove the principles of other sciences, therefore it is not a wisdom. Further, this doctrine is acquired by study, whereas wisdom is acquired by God's inspiration and is accordingly numbered among the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Therefore this doctrine is not a wisdom. On the contrary, it is written in Deuteronomy, the book Deuteronomy, this is your wisdom and understanding in the sight of nations. I answer that. This doctrine is wisdom above all human wisdoms, not merely in any one order, but absolutely. For since it is the part of a wise man to order and to judge, since lesser matters can be judged in the light of some higher cause, he is said to be wise in any genus who considers highest cause in that genus. The highest cause, is it? Something left out. Or yes. The highest cause is in that genus. The highest cause is in that genus, it would be. Thus, in the realm of building, he who plans the form of the house is called wise, and architect in relation to the subordinate labourers who trim the wood and make ready the stones. Thus it is, as a wise architect I have laid the foundation. Now the second thing he gives. Again, in order of all human life, the prudent man is called wise, inasmuch as he directs his acts to a fitting end. Thus it said, wisdom is prudence to a man. Therefore, he who considers absolutely the highest cause of the whole universe, namely God, is most of all called wise. Hence wisdom is said to be the knowledge of divine things, as Augustine says. But sacred doctrine essentially treats of God viewed as the highest cause, for it treats him not only so far as he can be known through creatures, just as philosophers knew him. That which is known of God is manifest in them. That's a famous thing of the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. We dealt with that earlier. We can know the invisible things from the things he's made. We can argue from the effects back to God. But also so far as he is known to himself alone and revealed to others. Hence sacred doctrine is specially called a wisdom. I'd like you to turn back a page. I wanted to draw your attention to something there. Is it one page back? Yes, it is. On page 140, reply objection 1. The second last line of that objection, reply to the objection 1. No, that's not it. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh no, it's here. It's on this, I'm sorry. On the same page, 141. Reply objection 2. You see the italics there. Destroying councils and every height. Every, not ever. There's a letter left out there. By the way, I correct all these things. If you want them sent on to you with all the corrections, I'll certainly be willing to do that. No? Okay.
Too much expense in paper.
Yes, that's what I thought. I do my best, by the way, to keep it. I keep it at 12 point because of the sight of people our age. I keep it at 12 point, the script, and also I try to save paper when I'm printing, always. I've manipulated things so you wouldn't have half a page here and half a page there. I do my best on that. So, sacred science doctrine derives its principles not from any human knowledge, but from the divine knowledge by which, as the highest wisdom, all our knowledge is ordered. So, in other words, of course it is a wisdom. And the fact that it gets its principles, etc., from God doesn't take that away. He who considers the highest cause of the whole universe, namely God, is most of all called wise. Now, I think we've got a pretty good grasp of that. On reply to objection 2, the principles of the other sciences either are evident and cannot be proved, or they are proved by natural reason in some other science. Now, and cannot be proved. That doesn't mean to say they cannot be defended. You can't prove principles of reason because they're the most basic. There's nothing more basic than them. And when you prove something, you prove it from something more basic. But what you can do is, by showing to deny them, denies the supreme principle. Nothing can be and not be together under the same respect. You can't have yes and no with standing on equal footing. If you say something is true or something is not true, right, it's either one or the other. Can't be both. So you reduce it to that supreme principle. That's how we defend them. In other words, we defend them by a negative way. Whether God is the subject matter of this science. So, he does say something here too, that in this article, this last article, he says here, since judgment pertains to wisdom, in accord with a twofold manner of judging, there is a twofold wisdom. A man may judge in one way by inclination. He may say, for instance, do you think you should do this, that we are permitted to do this or do that? Well, a man who's a good man might say, well, I don't think we should do that. By his natural inclination takes him in a right direction. Another man may do it from knowledge. So there's two ways that we can judge something. They pertain to wisdom. One person can be naturally wise, another person can acquire it by study. Let's put it that way. That's what it really amounts to. See on the third last line over the page, on that top one there, the top paragraph. The second manner of judging belongs to this doctrine, inasmuch as it is acquired by study, though principles are obtained by revelation. But before that he says, as Dionysius says, Hierotheus is taught not only as one learning, but also as one experiencing divine things. Now here's a problem. Whether God is the subject matter of this science. If we're going to study man, we can know man, what man is, so we can know that it can be the subject of the science. The object of a science is all the predicates, all the things we can say about the subject. Predicate means what's sayable about what went before. The apple is red. Red is a predicate about apple, saying about what's before. Man is rational. That's a predicate. Rational is about man. So, but in order to say things about man, we know what a man is. But do we know what God is? How can we make any statements about him? Can he be the subject matter of this science? How are we going for time?
5 minutes.
Yes. So, the subject, on the contrary, the subject matter of a science is that of which it principally treats. But in this science, the treatment is mainly about God, for it is called theology, as treating of God. Therefore, God is the subject matter of this science. I answer that. God is the subject matter of this science. The relation between a science and its subject matter is the same as that between a habit or a power and its object. Chemistry. There's a habit. What's its object? Substances as changeable. Photography. What's its object? Figures as coloured. They've got to have some colour, otherwise you can't touch them. Sight. Its object is extended colour. Coloured expanse, if you like. But it's impossible to express the essence of God, as the first objection says. Therefore, he cannot be the subject matter of this science. So, the subject matter, God is the subject matter. Because that's what the sacred theology primarily deals with. Relation between a science and its subject matter is the same as that between a habit or a power and its object. The power of sight and its object, coloured extent. A science and its subject matter. The science is focusing on the subject matter to discover in it all the predicates, all the things we can say about it. We study man to find out, oh, he's a social animal. Oh, he's a laughing animal. He's a talking animal. We focus on that subject, man, in order to discover that. How can we focus on God? That's the big difficulty here. God is the subject matter of this science. The relation between a science and its subject matter is the same as that between a habit or a power and its object. Now, properly speaking, the object of a power or habit is that under whose formality all things are referred to that power or habit, as man and stone are referred to sight in that they are coloured. The power of sight can see all things inasmuch as they are coloured expanse. Hence, coloured things are the proper object of sight. But in sacred doctrine, all things are treated under the aspect of God, either because they are God himself or because they refer to God as to their beginning and end. Hence it follows that God is in his very truth the subject matter of this science. This is made clear also from the principles of this science, namely the articles of faith, for faith is about God. The subject matter of the principles and of the whole science must be the same, since the whole science is contained virtually in its principles. So as Aristotle said, a small error in principle leads to a great error in the conclusion, my friends. That's what the universities are doing, making errors in the principle. In certain places, in psychology departments, etc., if you were to speak about the freedom of the human will, they'd laugh at you. Result is, everything that comes then, they want to control man as if they're controlling robots. So, this is made clear also from the principles of this science, namely the articles of faith, for faith is about God. The subject matter of the principles and of the whole science must be the same, since the whole science is contained virtually in its principles. Now, virtually doesn't mean almost. It means that the seeds are in it. The seeds are in the study on man. The principles about man contain all the seeds, as it were, of what comes in our understanding of man. Some, however, looking to what is treated in this science and not to the aspect under which it is treated, have asserted the subject matter of this science to be something other than God. Well, we need to worry about that. Now, this reply here is what is important. Although we cannot know what consists the essence of God, nevertheless, in this doctrine we make use of his effects, either of nature or of grace, in the place of a definition of God. A definition states the nature of something. A definition always tells you what something is. The definition of a triangle. A plane figure bounded by 3 straight lines. The definition tells you what the nature of the thing is. So, even as in some philosophical sciences, we demonstrate something about a cause from its effect by taking the effect in the place of a definition of the cause. So, that's what we do. We can't know the nature of God, but we can discuss him as the Creator, the Almighty, the be-all and end-all of man, the Alpha and the Omega, or the one that gives us beatitude. So we take one of the effects as the place of the definition of God. So we cannot know the subject matter is God himself, but as seen in his effects. Taking the effect in the place of a definition. Whatever other conclusions are reached in this sacred science are comprehended under God, not as parts of species or accidents, but in some way ordained to him. Okay, that's not quite so important. But the important thing is, how can we deal with God? When we've got to understand him in order to be able to have a science about him. The same as we have to understand man in order to have a science about him. For instance, if you'd never met a man, and you didn't know that man could laugh and talk, you would have no knowledge of him. But once you're given that definition, that he's the centre of something that laughs and talks, well, you could use laugh and talk in place of knowing the essence of man. Well, that's what we do with God. We speak about him as the Creator, the Almighty. In other words, we're defining him through effects. Pardon me. That's what we're doing, since we cannot have direct knowledge of him. But there are people, of course, who can have some kind of a direct knowledge, not by way of inspiration. The mystics, people like that, they can have some knowledge, a greater knowledge of God than we have it, because they sense his effects in their own souls. So they have a greater knowledge. But the rest of us, we can say, we can speak about him in terms of his effects. And that gives us much more knowledge than we might realize. That gives us the knowledge. For instance, he's the one that gives us the ultimate happiness. And primitive people speak of him like this. Lots of primitive peoples. I'm always amazed by my Jewish student, a young woman, who, by the way, in a class of about 75 came top brilliantly. And she would never put G-O-D on paper. It was always G-D. Would not utter the name of God. And I admire that little girl for her respect for the name of God. So God can be the subject matter through his effects. The same as we can know man through his effects. Lots of people don't have the same inspiration, the same knowledge of God's nature, of man's nature as, say, the philosopher who has studied and taught rational psychology over the years. But that person can have a knowledge of him from his effects. The one that gives him peace, the one that puts order into his life, all sorts of things. So it's sort of an indirect knowledge. I think we'll finish up there tonight.
Thank you.
I hope you're learning a lot about various aspects of science as we go along in this.